Could you please help this new channel by liking and subscribing? As you see, most of you listening are not subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. Thank you so much.
This trip was meant to be a peaceful weekend getaway in the mountains for me and Ben, my boyfriend of 3 years. He found a charming A-frame cabin on a vacation rental website, set alongside a gurgling river and nestled in a secluded forest. It seemed like the perfect romantic retreat from our stressful city lives. I should have known the remote location was too good to be true. When Ben plugged the cabin's address into the GPS, it immediately took us down empty back roads that didn't even show up on any of our maps. The further we got from the highway, the more rugged the roads became. The robotic voice of the GPS guided us deeper into the winding mountain paths, assuring us it was leading us to our idyllic destination. But an ominous feeling sank into my bones. These narrow, overgrown roads couldn't possibly lead to a luxury cabin. "Are you sure this GPS is taking us the right way?" I asked Ben nervously, as tree branches screeched against the sides of our small rental car. He calmly told me to trust the technology, though he refused to meet my eyes. I could tell Ben was starting to have his own doubts, but his male ego refused to admit we could possibly be lost. We drove for hours, or what felt like hours. It was impossible to track time accurately under the thick forest canopy overhead. The road twisted around on itself again and again. We passed the same moss-covered boulder at least 5 times, I was certain. When I anxiously pointed this out to Ben, he dismissed my observation, blaming the repetitive scenery on my overactive imagination. But dread swirled inside me like a dark fog. We were going in circles with no escape. The GPS continued guiding us, but the directions grew more convoluted, often contradicting each other. The display glitched and flickered, as if struggling to load. Empty spaces appeared on the map, where clearly defined roads and landmarks should have been. My heart pounded. We needed to turn around immediately before it was too late. Pleading with Ben to stop so we could reorient ourselves, he just shot me an irritated look and kept driving. He insisted the GPS would get us there soon, but the technology had betrayed us and Ben refused to accept it. As we continued deeper into the mountain forest, following the defective device's every command, the environment around us grew hazier. The thick trees blotted out any trace of sunlight, surrounding us in an impenetrable darkness. Strange noises echoed from the woods, howls and shrieks from creatures I couldn't identify. I was certain unfriendly eyes watched us from the shadows, tracking our every move, waiting for us to make a mistake. The car began sputtering and slowing, the gas tank needle hovering at empty. Still, Ben doggedly followed the GPS, insisting we must be close now. Within minutes, the car shuddered to a halt in the middle of the dirt road, enveloped by towering pines. We were stranded with no cell service, no supplies, and night swiftly approaching. Fear swirled around me like a cyclone as the reality of our bleak situation set in. Ben feverishly turned the key in the ignition, begging the car to start up again, but it was hopeless. We were trapped. The GPS continued blaring out garbled directions, urging us to continue onward. "You are on the right path," its warped voice droned. "Do not turn back now." Ben sat paralyzed, staring ahead with glazed eyes, allowing the device he trusted so completely to make our decisions. But it had led us to ruin. I begged Ben to snap out of it, but he remained entranced by the commands, convinced salvation was just ahead. As darkness settled around us, the forbidding forest came alive with sinister sounds and shadows. Branches cracked, footsteps circled the car, unseen things hovered just out of sight. Ben wanted to go looking for help, but I convinced him anything could be lurking in those dark woods. We locked the doors and hunkered low in our seats, clinging to each other, praying we'd make it until morning. We took turns sleeping in fitful bursts, startling awake at the ominous noises outside. The creatures of the night taunted us as we waited helplessly for daylight to free us from this waking terror. My body ached from tension. Ben held me close, both seeking and providing comfort, our facades of bravery crumbling away. At first light, we cautiously exited the car, peering into the gloom. A ghostly fog shrouded the surrounding woods, masking potential threats. Ben searched desperately for any trail or road we could follow to safety. but the vegetation was so thick we could barely see 10 feet in any direction. We had no choice but to push ahead into the unknown, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could help lead us out of this living nightmare. Before I turned to follow Ben into the misty trees, I took one last look at the broken GPS, its display clouded and cracked, still faintly whispering, "You can never leave." A chill raced down my spine as I hurried to catch up with Ben, praying the light of day would release us, but fearing this cursed forest had claimed us forever. When Alex first suggested a spur-of-the-moment road trip to hit up some national parks, I was thrilled. The idea of wind in our hair, windows down, belting out songs at the top of our lungs as the landscapes rolled by sounded like pure freedom after being cooped up at home during quarantine. I hastily packed bags for both of us, loaded up my car, and by sunrise we were cruising down the open highway out of Phoenix. The first few hours passed in a blur of snacks, terrible sing-alongs, and contagious laughter. I had one hand out the window catching the breeze while Alex fiddled with the radio, searching for the perfect road trip jams. At a rest stop outside Flagstaff, he took over driving so I could play DJ, queuing up an epic playlist I'd crafted just for this trip. We were headed to the Grand Canyon first, though I had a whole itinerary mapped out: Zion, Arches, Joshua Tree, and more. I daydreamed about watching the sun set over endless canyons, feeling small yet alive, surrounded by the vast beauty of nature. Reality hit as we merged onto the interstate outside Winslow and straight into bumper-to-bumper traffic. I checked the GPS, but every route was gridlocked for miles. After 20 minutes crawling at a snail's pace, I started scanning the map for alternate side roads to bypass this mess. I finally spotted a thin gray line that peeled off the main highway and cut through open desert. "Take exit 117, I instructed Alex. He hesitated, not keen on straying from the interstate, but ultimately complied when he saw no cars were moving. The exit spilled us out onto a ragged 2-lane road slicing through empty scrubland. Tiny rocks pinged against the car as Alex gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles pale. The asphalt hadn't been smoothed in ages, leaving us bouncing roughly along. "Are you sure this was the right call?" he asked after nearly an hour, anxiety creeping into his voice. "Gotta be better than that parking lot behind us," I replied, trying to sound confident despite my own doubts growing. Onwards we crawled through the barren desert. Just as I was about to suggest turning around, the outline of buildings rose up on the hazy horizon. A battered road sign announced we were approaching Calico, Arizona, population 215. "Oh, thank God, real civilization ahead," Alex exhaled with relief. But as we rolled into the ramshackle town, the hair on my neck prickled. Everything seemed strangely frozen in time, straight out of the 1950s. The shops and houses were untouched relics that hadn't seen fresh paint or repairs in decades. I suggested we stop and ask for directions back to the interstate, but Alex just shook his head, unnerved by the complete lack of people. "This is a ghost town," he muttered. He was right. There wasn't a soul around, no movement or signs of life at all. Just parked cars and bikes left to gradually decay in the elements. We were running low on gas from the long detour, though, so against his judgment, Alex pulled into the dusty station, the only one in this abandoned outpost. Inside was oddly tidy, almost pristine, as if the staff had simply stepped out and would return shortly. Shelves were still fully stocked with snacks, long since expired. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, now boiled down to tarry black sludge. Out front, a pair of trucks were parked by the garage, free of rust and seemingly fresh off the factory line. I talked Alex into grabbing some food. If we were going to trespass, might as well take advantage. The ancient cash register wouldn't open without a key, so I left a $20 on the counter by the hissing coffee pot. We couldn't spend all day wandering the empty town, so we hit the road again, planning to loop south, then west, to rejoin the interstate. Consulting the faded map, I saw another small town called Harmony lay just 10 miles down this road. My nerves settled a bit when we passed the weather-beaten sign and were surrounded by simple houses and farms. No more ghost towns. Surely this meant we were nearing civilization again. But as we rolled through the humble streets, an icy chill ran down my spine. Everything looked exactly like Calico. Toys and bicycles littered overgrown yards. Food rotted on tables inside untouched homes. Not a single resident could be found. The sun was sinking towards the horizon now, casting an eerie glow over the silent town. Though unsettled, we weren't keen on spending the night crammed in my car. Just beyond the limits of Harmony stood a small motor lodge, its flickering no vacancy sign still lit. I convinced Alex to stop so we could get some rest. The office was empty, so I grabbed a key and found us an end suite. Just one night, I assured him, then we'd be on our way at dawn. I tried to pretend this was a normal motel, but neither of us could ignore the prickling unease. Exhaustion must have eventually taken over, though, as I was startled awake in the pitch dark by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps right outside the door. Alex was wide-eyed, both of us frozen in fear. We listened to that ominous thudding echo down the walkway, accompanied by hushed voices I couldn't make out. Alex risked a glance through the curtains, then whipped back with alarm written across his face. "We need to go. Now," he whispered forcefully. I didn't ask questions, just helped hastily shove our belongings into bags. The doorknob rattled just as Alex yanked me towards the back window. We half tumbled out into the cold night air and took off running. Risking a backward glance, I could see dark silhouettes milling around the motel, drifting between rooms. My nerves screamed to go faster as Alex sped us away from that cursed place. Only when the bright floodlights of Phoenix appeared on the horizon did I finally relax into my seat. Against all odds, we'd escaped that shadowy purgatory, back to the land of the living. But that night still haunts me. Who were those specters, and what were their intentions? Some things are better left to the imagination. One piece of wisdom I gained: enjoy the journey, but avoid the desolate detours. Stick to the main paved routes. The back roads don't always lead where you hope. It was spring break of our senior year at college when my friends Claire, Mike, and I decided to go on a cross-country road trip adventure. We had been stuck on campus all winter dealing with heavy course loads and stressful midterms. Before entering the real world after graduation, we wanted one last epic hurrah, a chance to escape school for a week and create some unforgettable memories together. After packing up snacks, cameras, and our favorite mix CDs, we loaded my SUV and hit the open highways. The first couple of days were filled with sightseeing stops and goofing around during long stretches of driving. We belted out songs and played silly road trip games to pass the time. Claire was in charge of the maps and navigation, so she directed us to quirky roadside attractions along the way. Mike served as the official trip photographer, taking candid shots of Claire trying to read the map upside down. I happily went wherever the road took us, one hand on the wheel and the other out the window, feeling the cool mountain air blow by. When we hit the Rockies, we pulled off at a scenic lookout point. We snapped photos of each other with the craggy, snow-capped peaks behind us. Before getting back in the car, Mike suggested we pick up some road trip snacks at the next gas station, so we wouldn't have to dip into our cooler in the back seat as often. About an hour later, I exited towards a rundown gas station off the interstate, just as the sun was going down. Mike hopped out to grab drinks and snacks inside, while Claire started pumping gas. As I was cleaning the bugs off my windshield, a man emerged from the side of the building and wandered over. His clothes were dirty, and he had a scraggly beard, but his voice sounded friendly as he asked if we could give him a ride to the next town over. He said his car had broken down along the highway a ways back. I hesitated at first, but the man seemed harmless, so I agreed before thinking it through. The others were preoccupied with other tasks and didn't notice our new passenger climb into the back seat. When Mike returned, chips and drinks in hand, he shot me a confused look about the stranger now occupying our vehicle. I just shrugged, not wanting to be rude after already agreeing to help. We all felt the mood shift, growing tense and uneasy as we got back on the road. The hitchhiker introduced himself as Ned and tried to make casual small talk. When we gave only one-word responses, he switched gears and started telling us creepy stories about the history of the highway we were traveling. He described exact mile markers where other travelers' cars had mysteriously broken down overnight. He recounted chilling local legends about demon dogs and night witches that roamed the mountains we were passing through. Ned recited horrific tales of ransacked campsites found in the mornings after families had abandoned their vehicles the night before. His stories gave me chills down to my bones. Mike and Claire grew quiet, tired of politely entertaining Ned's disturbing stories. After close to an hour, we approached one of the doomed mile markers Ned had described in vivid detail. Right on cue, the SUV engine sputtered and stalled before seizing up completely. I steered the failing vehicle onto the pitch-black shoulder as the headlights flickered off, leaving us engulfed in darkness. Ned urged us to evacuate the SUV immediately, insisting they were coming for us now. Mike scrambled to gather supplies and blankets from the back, while Ned seemed to vanish abruptly into the night. An eerie whistling wind kicked up outside as strange, unnatural sounds echoed around us. Claire peered out into the impenetrable darkness, her face etched in terror as she glimpsed glowing eyes watching us just beyond the tree line. Mike shouted for us to just start walking, to leave everything behind in our haste. We hurriedly grabbed what little we could and abandoned my dead SUV, fleeing down the vacant highway on foot. We stumbled along the white line for what felt like hours, with no flashlights to light our way. Mike tried to calm Claire's hysterical crying while I silently cursed myself for ever letting Ned into the vehicle. The batteries in Mike's pocket flashlight barely lasted minutes at a time, leaving us swallowed again and again by the malevolent darkness. With no cell service in the remote mountains, we were completely isolated and alone. No other cars ever passed us that night as we walked. When we could go no further, we took shelter under a concrete bridge, clinging to each other against the biting cold. No one slept, too fearful of what sinister things lurked in the darkness surrounding us. We sat alert all night, listening to the howling wind whip through the mountains. As the sun finally crept above the peaks, there was no sign of my abandoned SUV or any other living creature. Gathering our senses, we continued on foot until finding a remote town with a phone to call for help. We waited hollow-eyed and withdrawn in that tiny bus station, wrapped in shock blankets provided by emergency responders. Ned had disappeared without explanation, as if he'd never been real at all. But the terror we felt on that deserted highway had been dangerously real. In the light of day, we hardly spoke of him or what had pursued us in the dark. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I know I'll never stop wondering what evil truly walked along that highway and what twisted purpose Ned served that ominous night.